All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for those that are able to log in today to join me. And just a heads up that this is being recorded, so this recording will be shared with anyone else who wishes to watch it later on until the deadline. I know right after the long weekend, um, sitting at our computer isn't the most favorite thing to do, but thanks for logging in today. So I'm Chelsea Cunningham. I'm a program and engagement manager here at SHRF, and I'm talking about the Mobilize Grant today. Um, why isn't it? Oh, there we go. Before I get into the main part of the presentation, I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge that SHRF and our offices are located here in Saskatoon, which is Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. And that SHRF and me personally, everything we do, we try to make sure that we always have the lens of what can we be doing better. So we're always open to feedback and um, things like this, acknowledging the land that we are currently working and residing on. So encourage everyone to do the same. So the agenda today, I'm going to talk a little bit about what SHRF is, the grants that we offer, and then I'll get into the main purpose of this presentation, which is talking a little bit more about the context of some of the application requirements and the specifics of who can apply, how you apply, and hopefully some key takeaways to help you in your applications and specifically help those applications be successful. There will also be time for questions at the end. You're welcome to ask questions in the chat as we go, but I'll probably wait till the end to answer them. And you're also more than welcome to ask me questions afterwards through email if you would like, if you're not comfortable asking the question within this webinar. So first, who is SHRF? So the Saskatchewan Health Research Foundation, or SHRF, is a arm's length government agency that funds, supports, and promotes the impact of health research that matters to Saskatchewan. So the majority of our funding comes from the government of Saskatchewan through Innovation Saskatchewan. And then we reinvest that funding into research to benefit health in Saskatchewan. Says we have a few key activities. As I mentioned, we invest in research. We do that through developing and executing research funding competitions. We uphold a rigorous peer review process. We partner with other organizations to increase our investments. We also try to measure the impact and share stories about how research has positively impacted health in Saskatchewan. And we act as a trusted and neutral convener for the research community. When I say we support health research, I like to clarify that we mean anything that impacts human health. So it's any field, discipline, methodologies. Um, it can include things like developing new medicine and treatments, strengthening the healthcare system, but anything really that improves the health or well-being of people of Saskatchewan is eligible for our funding. And then just a quick reminder, we do have a few different grant opportunities besides the one I'm talking about today. So we have peer review research competitions, which are larger project grants. And then specifically today, I'm talking about the Connections program, which focuses on connecting and aligning research with the needs of Saskatchewan. So this one is typically smaller funding opportunities that focus on bridging that research to practice gap. Which brings us to the Mobilize Grant specifically. So the purpose of this funding opportunity is to fund knowledge mobilization activities in relevant and practical settings and mediums, with the aim of improving the applicability and impact of health research in Saskatchewan. And so I'll focus a little bit now on what is knowledge mobilization. There's a few different terms people use to refer to this. Knowledge translation is also common. But essentially, I am referring to any activities that could bring awareness to research and findings in a way that can be used in practice. So raising awareness is good, but we also want to see that the research is being presented in a way that is useful to the audience you are targeting. So this can include compiling knowledge or best practices, disseminating, sharing, exchanging knowledge, co-creating tools, education materials. It's quite broad, and will really depend on your fields, the context you're working in, etc. Um, some of you may be familiar with this figure. There's many different forms of it that have been quoted over the past years. The stat of it takes 17 years for research to get into practice. Um, so we're not too worried about the specifics of why or anything, but essentially this Mobilize Grant funding opportunity is designed to try to work within that space of the gap. So we really want to see people taking something that is known, but maybe not used in practice and figuring out why or how is a potential way to address this gap. So building on that definition, knowledge mobilization should be encouraging exchanges between the researchers and the knowledge users. And we use knowledge user to refer to anyone who can receive and use new knowledge to implement improvements in health. So this can be at an individual level, this can be a practitioner who sees patients and is using the new knowledge to implement improvements to their practice, community organizations, policymakers, etc. And then just a little bit more on the types of knowledge mobilization and the roles of those knowledge users. Um, there's a few different models that have been proposed. So you can see in this first line, the knowledge producers, which would be researchers in this context. They produce the knowledge and then they push it forward to the public or to the knowledge users. There's also the pull model where users has identified a problem and knowledge producers or researchers are working to try to address that problem for them. Or there's an interactive, integrated knowledge mobilization model where producers and knowledge users are working together to address the problem in a back and forth type of method. And I highlight this little diagram here because the Mobilize Grant objectives, I really tried to make these align with any of the forms of knowledge mobilization. So to apply for the Mobilize Grant, your activity has to address only one of these three objectives. And these objectives are loosely worded to try to reflect that different push-pull or integrated knowledge translation. So objective one, you can be facilitating the use and integration of health research knowledge and evidence into practice. Or you could be trying to facilitate the use of relevant practical knowledge to inform and guide research activities. So that would kind of align more with that demand model where the knowledge users have identified a problem and the researchers are going to design the research in order to better address that gap for them. Or it can also facilitate the participation of non-academic team members in the research and knowledge sharing process in order to support that integrated knowledge mobilization. The common theme between all these grant objectives is that the knowledge sharing, at least one party, the audience or someone on the team, has to be in a non-academic role. So the Mobilize Grant doesn't support academic knowledge sharing mobile activities. So we can't support research conference presentations or academic publications in this program. A few of the details for the funding. So value is up to 10,000 for a 1-year term. We don't require any matching funding or anything like that. But if applicants require any additional resources in order to make the project feasible, it's always a good idea to have those listed in your application. I believe there is I think, yeah, a budget Excel on a set table to list any alternate sources of funding that are also being contributed to the project. And the term is 1 year, but SHRF does allow no cost extensions. So when you're coming up with your timeline, the timeline is expected to be for that 1-year term. But it's okay if that timeline is kind of an ideal timeline. Um, it should be realistic, but we also understand that things happen. There are many delays that happen that are outside of your control, and that won't be a problem. Um, as long as you're up to date on your reporting, we can do an extension and just extend the term of the grant for you. Um, I think I forgot to update these dates. Okay, so ignore this timeline that I have listed. The deadlines are actually in the application package. I'll get you to refer to that. But the key takeaway here is that we do 2 intakes. So the first one is in July, and then the second one is later in the year in February. So if it doesn't come together this summer, there is always a chance to apply again. But I will note that it is just one application per principal applicant per intake. But if you apply at the July deadline, you can apply again at February. That's not a problem. And if you submit an application as the principal applicant, you are allowed to be a co-applicant on other applications within the same deadline. And if you would like to see some examples of what we've funded in the past, you can always visit shrf.ca/stories. Usually a few months after the funding goes out, we do a public announcement sharing who the recipients were with a short summary. So that can sometimes be helpful if you're still not sure if it's something that really fits with the funding opportunity. Sometimes seeing examples of what has been funded can be helpful. But you can also just send me an email and we'll set up a short meeting to walk through your idea, what your plan is, and figure out if it's a fit for Mobilize, if there are some things that would have to be emphasized or changed to be a fit, things like that. Which brings me to our next section about who can apply. Um, So for the Mobilize Grant, the eligibility of who can apply is different from most of our other funding opportunities. So for this opportunity specifically, you don't have to be a researcher with a designated researcher position at a post-secondary institution. The principal applicant must still reside and work in Saskatchewan for the funding period of the grant. They cannot be a trainee, unfortunately. You have to have your supervisor or someone that works independently as the principal applicant. The principal applicant must also agree to adhere to all SHRF funding policies and reporting requirements. This bullet point is covered if the funding's awarded, you'll sign a notice of acceptance, which highlights the terms and conditions of the funding, mostly indicating that you'll follow the project as proposed and funded, and that you'll report to SHRF as required annually. And finally, the principal applicant must have a position that supports them to carry out activities that promote evidence-based health knowledge and practices on behalf of their organization for public benefit. So this is written to include post-secondary institutions that have a memorandum of understanding with SHRF, but also registered charities and nonprofit organizations. So if you are at one of these post-secondary institutions, the application's pretty straightforward. You just need to make sure that you get a signature from your institution's research office, that they are able to administer the grant funding on your behalf. That MOU agreement that SHRF has with these institutions means that these institutions have agreed to hold funding for SHRF and provide statements of account to us on behalf of all principal applicants from that organization. So you just need a signature from their research office confirming that they will do this, and your application will be good to go. If you're from a charity or a nonprofit, I may require some additional information just to make sure that all our policies will be covered. So if funding, you'll have to be able to provide us banking information to receive the payment. For these grants, we just pay them in a lump sum within a month of the funding being awarded, I believe, usually. Um, we also usually need a CRA registration number and a contact for a financial office or designated bookkeeper or whoever is going to be providing those annual statements of account to SHRF for the duration of the grant. We have an Excel template for these statements. It reflects kind of a standard grant budget with lines for salary, supplies, etc. So it's just a matter of keeping track of the expenditures in the proper category and then getting it signed and submitted to SHRF annually. And then for nonprofits that aren't registered charities, I usually have to ask for some additional information about your organization just to confirm nonprofit status and the relation to your nonprofit's goals and promoting health. So it's usually just confirming your charitable status and experience receiving grants, or something as simple as a copy of your annual report showing your mandate fits within the scope I described on the previous slide. So I do encourage, if you're from a charity and a nonprofit, just to contact me before doing the application, just to make sure everything's in order. Our system is, we're still working on it. It's not set up to this pipeline yet, but we are working on it, and it is not a problem at all. If you log in and don't see the application, that doesn't mean you can't apply. It just might mean our system's still a little bit behind on this policy. And I will talk about the online application system in the next section, I believe. Um, so that covers the principal applicant, who is the one putting the grant together, the application, submitting it, and is in charge of doing the reporting. But you can also apply to this opportunity with a team. So you can have co-applicants who are also on the project, even if they're not the principal applicant. There's no minimum team requirement on this grant. So theoretically, you as the principal applicant could put together the application, submit it, and be eligible. But I really want to emphasize that applications to this funding opportunity should demonstrate engagement, or at least the potential to engage with knowledge users and your identified target audience. So I've listed a few examples of how this can be done. Co-applicants can be sometimes the easiest, but if you have in-kind resources from a knowledge user or similarly invested organizations, letters of support are also welcome on the application. As I mentioned, co-applicants, or a detailed project plan describing how knowledge users and your audience will be successfully engaged. We understand sometimes it's a lot of work, even just connecting with people and getting them interested in your project. So you can still apply. We just ask that you try to think through your project plan and really describe and convince us that This is something that is needed. The audience will benefit it. You just need to get out there and talk to them, or um, sometimes people have specific knowledge users or nonprofits that they'll approach with the idea and the topic, things like that. And then this last bullet point I've just left open is other relevant methods of support within the knowledge user or audience as identified in the application. Because again, I recognize every project's going to be very unique. So it might not fit nicely into one of the first bullet points I listed, but um, we have, yeah. As long as you are able to convince the reader that you've thought through this project plan, you know your audience, and you know what they need, that should be good enough. I will talk a little bit about the different project team roles and some of the terms I've been throwing around already. So anyone participating in your proposed project falls into one of these three categories on our application. So co-applicants are typically described as the team members contributing to either the intellectual, cultural, or scientific direction of the project. So these are typically your researchers, but this does also include knowledge users and people with lived experience who are guiding the project with their different perspectives, and providing that input. There are also space to have personnel listed on the project. So that's trainees and research staff who are carrying out specific aspects of the project. The policy specifically allows them to be compensated from grant funds. So if you're paying someone from the grant, they're usually listed as personnel. And then finally, people can also be listed as supporters. This is similar to the co-applicant role, but this is for individuals or organizations who are providing a more limited or defined role within the project. So for example, they could have an interest in the proposed outcomes, but maybe aren't providing specific feedback or direction to the project. So anyone that's a supporter, letters of support are a good idea to get from them. Also, if they're providing a specific role that is important to the project's feasibility, it's a good idea to have a letter of support from them as well, just confirming that they are providing the resources detailed in the application. And yeah, just some further definitions of these co-applicant roles. I've kind of already covered the knowledge user definition. Just to reemphasize, it's any individual interested in the applications of the knowledge generated from the proposed research. So I would expand this for Mobilize to say also anyone that has knowledge from practice that they can contribute to the project. And then when we say person with lived or living experience, this is an individual supporting the project through their personal experience with a health issue or experience as an informal caregiver. So all three of these are considered co-applicants. The perspectives are all equally important, especially in this Mobilize grant funding opportunity. All right, and then some of the specific application requirements. So you've got your team, you've got your idea, and you've confirmed that it is eligible and a good fit for the Mobilize funding opportunity. And now it's time to put your application together. So you'll have to have a application proposal. So this will include background and rationale for the project, referencing evidence-based practices and research. References for this funding opportunity do not need to be extensive by any means. Just need to confirm that this is being, the foundation is in evidence-based practices and research. Your proposal should also identify specific project goals and objectives. So what I find usually presents as the most successful is kind of an overarching project goal and then a few specific objectives or benchmarks on the road to accomplishing that project goal. It makes the proposal easier to follow and helps assess the feasibility. You should have a clear activity plan. So in the application, this is in the form of a separate one-page timeline. As I mentioned earlier, it should be achievable within a year, but assuming that it's an ideal year where nothing that could go wrong goes wrong, but should still be realistic. If you're trying to recruit a bunch of people to work with you, probably won't happen in a week, but you can have a little bit of flexibility on that activity plan. The application will also provide a space to identify the specific audience that you are targeting with this application. I think it lets you list up to 5. One helpful tip here that I see quite a bit is that it's usually better to really hone in on a specific audience rather than trying to reach everyone within the same project. Because part of the application will be looking at how convincingly you're going to be able to reach your audience. So if you're targeting a specific audience, it's much easier to write your proposal geared towards that audience and being convincing. Your application in the proposal should also clearly outline the need or gap in current knowledge or practice that your activity is addressing. And it should address the feasibility of the project, including any potential pitfalls and mitigation, ethical considerations, etc. So this is very field specific again, but just a paragraph in your proposal showing that while your timeline might be idealistic, you have thought of the things that could go wrong and you have a plan to try to mitigate what those potential less ideal outcomes. And finally, your application will also be asked to include evaluation plan. I believe this is a separate section in the application where you can just provide a paragraph or two describing your evaluation plan. This doesn't have to be super extensive. I think a good way to approach this is to just think about what are some practical short-term measurements that we are able to capture throughout our project, and then presenting those and discussing the longer-term impacts, if relevant, or how these short-term impacts kind of indicate that the longer-term impacts might be successful. A few notes on the budgets. Generally, SHRF is publicly funded, so all costs should be fiscally responsible. We encourage people to look for cost-effective options where they can. Otherwise, anything that is a direct cost of the project is allowable, except for these 4 bullet point exceptions. So we're not able to pay for overhead or operating cost. If you are proposing a pilot project incorporating evidence-based knowledge or something similar, there is space for some of the cost of the program, but we don't pay for ongoing operating cost, if that makes sense. We also typically don't allow equipment purchases. There are cases where an exception can be approved, but you should reach out to me before submitting your application so that we can talk it through and make sure everything's still fitting within SHRF's policies. As I mentioned previously, this isn't a grant for academic knowledge sharing. So academic dissemination is not an allowable expense. This includes your manuscript publication fees, conference presentations, academic team meetings. And we also don't allow expenses for the express purpose of preparing future grant proposals. Pretty much essentially this is hiring a grant writer. You're definitely allowed to work on future proposals throughout the project, but just we don't allow the hiring of someone specifically to write the grant for you. And it's never a bad idea to look through the SHRF funding guide, as this has all of SHRF's policies that apply to allowable expenses across all SHRF programs. Right, and so for this next section so I talked about who can apply, what you need to have, and I referenced our online application system a few times. So this section, I'll get into a little bit more about what that is and how you go through this process. So SHRF has an online research management system, which we call the RMS. It's found at this URL, smartsimple.shrf.ca. And that is where everything happens from the application to the grant management. Um, and then we also have some application support information on our website. So hopefully you've already seen the application package. Um, if you haven't, or even if you have already looked at it, I encourage you to read it again. We try very hard to write things out clearly in the application package. I know it can be a little bit long, but the information is there for a reason. And then on our resources page, we have the SHRF funding guide, and there's also an RMS manual, which can help navigate some of that online system if needed. So for the RMS accounts, um, if you are new to the system, you will have to create an account, and this is just done from that homepage. If you type the URL in, it'll take you right to the login page there. And then this is where, depending on what organization you are applying from, it will look a little different for you. When you are registering, it'll ask you your organization options, and it breaks it down into the SHRF MOU research organizations, which are that slide I showed earlier with all the post-secondaries and the health authority on it. If you are a CRA registered charity, there is a separate option for that where you are able to look up your charity. I think you can look them up by name. Sometimes having the number helps facilitate the search better though. And then if you don't fit either of these first two categories, you have to register as an other organization. And then this is where that if this is your first application to SHRF, your organization may not be in our system directory yet. So you can just send me or Tanya a message. Her contact information will be at the end of this presentation. You just send us a quick message with the organization name and an address, and then we add it to the system, and then you're able to continue registration. If you are registering and you have registered under an organization, but now you're applying with a different organization, Tanya's able to switch that for you as well. So you can just send her an email instead of making a new account if you'd like. And then that's my final note that if you register as an other organization and you can't see the online application form, don't panic, just send me an email and I'll get that set up for you. Once you're in the RMS, from the homepage, you'll see current opportunities, and then you can create the application or ask me to create it for you. And then from there, you're able to work on the application at your own pace. The system saves everything as you go, so you can open the application, work on it piece by piece as needed. And then just as long as you submit before the deadline. We do encourage people, try not to wait right till the deadline. The system is built so that if any part of the application is missing, it won't allow you to submit. There's validation on most of the fields, so It does happen quite often that someone hits submit and then the system bounces it back and the deadline passes. But again, don't panic, just send us an email and we'll make sure it's all sorted out for you. And then so once you've got your application submitted, it comes to SHRF for review. So the initial post submission, I go through all the applications and do a quick screening to make sure everything's in place. If there's anything missing that was an obvious oversight, I may reach out just to confirm or get a new document from you if something went wrong in the system. But typically the process seems to go pretty well. So from there, they go for internal review. The applications are assessed by the criteria detailed in the application package. And this is a little bit different than the peer review that most research goes through. So this is being reviewed by an interdisciplinary um, internal committee. So the rationale and the criteria should focus a lot more on the proposed activities and how they will successfully reach the target audience and achieve the objectives they're outlining. Um, it's an interdisciplinary audience, so we're not assessing the importance of different topics or fields relative to one another. It's really more about, okay, you know your audience, you very clearly outlined that this is a gap that is present, and this is the thing that will successfully fill that gap. Um, and then, so that would be part of the review criteria. So these are outlined much, much better in the application package. I do encourage you to read those through a little bit more closely. But overall, yeah, so it looks at the quality of the proposal, sets, are your objectives clear and well defined? Does the proposal clearly meet the purpose and objectives of the Mobilize Grant? Um, Second criteria is engagement. So are the knowledge users and audience clearly identified? Are they involved in the proposal? Does the proposal show the evidence of resources required to complete the project? And then finally, outcomes and impact. So this is where it's assessed of, does the proposed project have the potential for impact on health outcomes? Is there a clear and appropriate evaluation plan, including information on how the outcomes and impacts will be measured? Okay, and so then this brings me to my key takeaways. So number one key takeaway should be that all fields, topics, stage of project are welcome to apply, as long as those application objectives are being met. So specifically, the application should show the involvement of knowledge users, but it is flexible into how you meet this requirement. And that your rationale should focus on why the activity meets a need or addresses a gap rather than why a health issue is important. And then the applications will be reviewed by non-experts, so adjust terminology accordingly. And a few other tips that, so these are based on just what I've been seeing as the program manager over the past year screening applications. So the proposal itself is only a 3-page document. So make sure you use that space wisely. If you find you're repeating information from another section of the application, it's okay to just cut that out of the proposal. For example, I see people describing the role of the team within the roles and responsibility document space that's provided, and then again in the proposal without adding any new information or context. So it's not necessarily that that's a bad thing. It's just that that space might have been better served talking more about either your audience or what your objectives are or a little bit of background. And then continuing on that, it seems to be generally a good idea to keep the background succinct. As I mentioned, the importance or burden of the specific issue, disease, etc., is not one of the criteria. So instead, focus in on outlining the context in which your project's working in and who the target audience is. So, like, how do you know that this is what your audience needs to meet this gap in practice? And that could be if you are also a practitioner, this could be part of your own experience working in the field. This could be conversations had with people who work in the field. Um, there are many different ways to show this. And then finally, I think this one repeats, but I just want to emphasize again about the feasible evaluation plan. Um, when we talk about impacting health, a lot of times this is very large scale, distant impacts that probably aren't measurable for many years, if ever. But just think about what could you evaluate in the interim to show that your project was successful. So you might not be able to measure and show that um, a physiotherapy clinic took your best practices and started offering it to patients instead of some other um, method that they had been doing. But you might be able to show that X number of practitioners came to your workshop to learn about it. That might be a little bit of an on the nose example, but I think it illustrates the point that we know the goal might be big and lofty, but it's okay to try to measure smaller, more feasible things in the meantime. And then as promised, we have some contacts for questions. So there's myself, or if it's related to the RMS or the application form specifically, can always reach out to Tanya. We like to joke here that she's our RMS magician because she seems to be able to fix all the problems. And then I think that is the end of my prepared content for today. So if there's any specific questions about anything that I rushed through, feel free to ask me to go back and discuss them more. If you have any specific questions about your project, happy to answer them now or by email later. And otherwise, just a reminder, this session will be posted as the recording, so you can share this with your colleagues. And I look forward to seeing everyone's applications. Thanks for joining today.